Hi everyone. My name is Alec from White Whale Comics, and with me is my buddy I Got Issues.
Hello,
I don't know if you want to use your real name.
Chris. That's fine. You could call me Chris.
I don't know. I just don't want to overstep. Um,
I think we're beyond that, right?
isn't that the whole point of this?
Yeah, I think we're already there.
Um, yeah, this is episode 2 of Comics as Therapy. We're talking about Mr. Miracle once again, since we talked a lot about depression and not a lot about the comic last time, and might again. But we didn't want to not finish the story or the discussion. So we're back for round two. Hopefully, a lot of you have seen the first one and read the book. I want to say hi to some people in the chat. First off, Comic Books NYC, I'm glad you could make it this time. Hulk Nuts, I'm glad you can make it as well. Kachung, hello. I got issues. You're in the chat saying some bitches. Way to set the tone. TJ, hello. Welcome as always. Barbarian Kung Fu. Tank Collects. Thank you, Tank Collects. We had a little scheduling snafu for the second time this week. We both scheduled live streams at the same time. So he was kind enough to move his a bit later. So right after this, you should go check out his stream.
It's
Um,
actually with Kachung and Delphia under
yeah,
the DK cosplay, and so, like you said, big thank you to them for being willing to move their show so we could catch theirs too.
yeah, I'm also excited to be able to watch it. Old Wolf 65, hello, Gorilla Grodd, Sin Potter, Gomez. I think that's everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming and hanging out and joining this. Um, I started by saying this last week, and just to reiterate, if you are struggling with depression or thinking about anything serious like suicide, I did put links in the description below for some resources to help you, just to let you know you're not alone and you have people out there who can help you if you need, because uh, so please look for that help if you need it. Now that that's heavy stuff is out of the way, let's talk about a comic book that is about really heavy stuff. We left off about roughly halfway through last time. Um, if you have not read the book, this is going to be a full spoiler show. I figure that probably goes without saying, but I don't want anyone giving us a hard time about it. So check that one off the to do. um, so we ended last time right when Barda is about to give birth to their son. And for me, that's kind of like a shift in the book a little bit. I don't know if you felt the same way. Um, and I feel like the beginning is very heavy on um, Scott's depression and anxiety and what he's going through. And, there's a lot of story in there too, but I feel like for a few issues at this point, it goes really heavy story and then kind of circles back to his issues. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think yeah, the first six issues are Scott struggling, people kind of ignoring him, his issues with his wife, with his brother, with his Oberon visions, and then issue seven sees the birth of their child, and I think that's when you start to see the entire dynamic of the book change. Because also at the end of issue six is when Darkseid kills Orion.
Yeah.
So not only in issue seven is he about to be a father, but he's also the High Father. He's also the leader of New
God.
Genesis. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's God, right? And and so yeah, he went from being this guy who kind of didn't have purpose, I think, and now he has a tremendous amount of purpose and responsibility, and I think that might be what pushes the story towards where it ends, and towards him kind of adapting and changing as a person, because he has to pick who he wants to be, what he's going to fight for, and what's important to him in his life.
Yeah, and fast forwarding a little bit, they continue this war. He's fighting, and he's trying to figure out how to, do what they've done this whole time, or tried to do this whole time, which is win this war against Darkseid, which seems impossible and infinite. And I'm sure that is a metaphor as well. But he starts kind of some peace talks with the with Apocalypse, and they think they came to terms, and then Darkseid comes back and says, no, like, I'll stop the war, I'll free all the prisoners, I'll do everything you want, but I want my grandson, basically. And so Scott is faced with what his father was faced with, which is, do I give up my son for the betterment of the world?
Yeah, because it can always get more complicated than it already is, right?
Right. And if he's not struggling with stuff enough, he's like, oh, do I do to my son what has put me in this place, or what is at least a significant portion of what put me into this place? And there's this really funny scene where he is at a grocery store, and he just asks the checkout clerk, while the checkout clerk's trying to sell him a rewards card. He's like, oh, do I stop a war to save billions of people, or do I, keep my son? What's the right thing to do? And this checkout guy is basically talks about the life equation, which is the anti-life equation, of, he says, well, basically, I think you have to do what's going to bring the most happiness to the world. And if you're losing your son, creates more sadness than the billions of people dying, then you can't give them up, basically. Which I thought was very insightful, for off the top of the dome of just some random person, not saying anything about people who work checkout. If you're a doctor, or a space engineer, if someone asks you a question like that and you just have an answer like that off the top of your head, you've been doing some thinking about some stuff, man.
But aren't we all? Isn't that the?
Yeah, I think that's.
I think that leads to a really good point. But I wanted to go back just a little bit for a minute, because there are two parts for me specifically. One that's just really funny, and one that's sort of real life for a lot of people. I think if you haven't read this, I just think it's hysterical, this whole section about, and these are real, I have a daughter, and I know some people who are watching have kids, and some of these are real life parent anxieties, when he's arguing with Funky Flashman, who's basically the babysitter, that you can't put a toy in the crib because the baby can suffocate. Yeah. And then he's Batman kills babies.
Yeah, and he says that a few times throughout the rest of the book, that Batman kills babies.
Yeah.
And that's super funny.
Right. And I think that's hysterical. But I also think what's funny is that in those issues, right, in 7 and 8, before they're kind of at the peace table, what you see is this flash back and forth. And it's a heavy reliance of what we talked about, with the 9-panel grids. But it goes white, black. And so. Yeah,
between the war and Apocalypse and his life on Earth with raising his son.
And they're flip-flopping, just like a lot of parents do with work schedules and babysitters and stuff. So when Scott is with the baby, Barda's on New Genesis leading the troops. And when Scott's on New Genesis leading the troops, Barda's with the baby. And they're constantly talking about things over the phone. And it's they're missing milestones, Barda's missing Jacob's first steps.
Yeah.
And that for me, I found that I really liked is that in the beginning of that chapter when he's singing, "Hush, Little Baby" to Jacob, and like I said, I think this is that transition to seeing Scott have this sort of like purpose in life. Is that this is a guy who started the book by wanting to be dead, right? Like he slit his wrists and he didn't want to fight anymore. And now he's on, Apocalypse, and he's getting shot by lasers, and he's getting stabbed, and he's got machines, grafting his leg back together. And there's this scene where he's like stumbling across the battlefield and singing like "Hush, Little Baby" to himself, and he sort of like passes out on the ground. Like he's beat up, he's exhausted, he's got nothing left in the tank. And then Barda calls him, and she's telling him, listen, listen to what he's saying. And she's telling him that when he sees the picture, he's saying "Dada." And
Yeah.
he gets himself up off the ground, and he's still like singing, and he puts his mask back on, and he's just like all serious, and he's like, "Daddy's gonna buy you a goddamn diamond ring." And I
Yeah.
just think that that's like really, I think that's really indicative of what you were talking about with like a tone switch in this half of the book, that he really has this purpose. Like he's really fighting for like his family, and to be a father, and for his son. And I think that that's really huge, because I feel like parts of that really echo for me some of the struggles I've been through, and some of my motivations to kind of get through some things center around my daughter, and around being trying to be a good father.
Yeah. And I think, you kind of brought up quickly an interesting point there, which is, it does kind of touch on what a lot of people do in their daily lives. Like you take away the war and apocalypse and just make that their jobs. And this could just be like an indie book about people's lives and their struggles, um, it's really interesting the way that they did that in this book, where they managed to create that balance of like, yeah, this is a comic book and it's about people with superpowers, but it's also not.
Right.
So I mean, like it definitely could have been told, without the superpower aspect of it, or the superhero aspect of it, and it still would have been a very similar story. Not to say that it, doesn't benefit from it, but it's just, I find that interesting. There was a part. Bear with me for a second. I know this is compelling. I like how this guy like tells him this story about Leonardo that turns out to be total hogwash.
Yeah, and he's like, had to come up with something. I'm taking a piss next to like a god.
Yeah.
I want a story.
So this is one of the first things I wanted to actually bring up, is this scene after. Well, I should probably show what happens.
You know what's funny, Alec, is that that
That's where you are.
Yeah, that's.
Glad we're on the same page. So literally and figuratively on the same page. So Scott says some stuff that pisses what's his name off here. I forget his name. Thank you. And he murders this dude because of it. And Scott keeps his cool during the peace talks, but then when he gets home, he's like clearly shaken and like very distressed by it. And again, Barda is kind of like strangely ignoring him. He's like, my teeth are clattering, can you hear them? And he says, if I breathe, they don't clatter. If I stop breathing. She's like, well, don't stop breathing. And it's just like, I think that was one of those moments where it's just like very, very pointed at that kind of idea of people not taking other people's problems seriously, even if when they do want to talk about them. I had kind of an interesting moment this week where someone at work asked me if I was doing okay, and I was like, well, I'm all right, I guess. And she was like, well, if you need to talk about it or anything, like, I was like, well, she's like, I don't want to make you if you're not comfortable with talking about it. I said, I'm not comfortable talking about it. I just assume that other people don't want to hear about it. And that is kind of true. I don't go bragging about my successes either for the same reasons, but I don't know if that's just my own issues of feeling like people aren't interested in what I have to say, but I think, especially on the sad, depressive side, people don't want to hear about that. They don't want to hear about your problems because everyone has problems, and they don't want to hear about yours because they want to talk about theirs, but they don't. Does that make sense?
Right. But I think that's like something too that I think we've discovered a little bit, just to, and not to shout anyone out by name, but I think that one of the things that I felt best about from doing the first episode was that a lot of people messaged myself, and I know you also, privately, and shared some things about themselves and said, thank you, and said that some of what their struggles were, and engaged in some conversation. And I think, like, yeah, we all have that mentality of like we don't want to share. And I think the reason why we don't want to share is exactly what you said, because we think nobody wants to hear it. But sometimes I think the opposite is true. I think sometimes when people are asking, like, what's wrong? Is everything okay? I think sometimes they do want to hear it because they care. And also because it opens up that doorway where, like, you can share with each other because maybe they
Sure.
have a similar experience, or maybe they're kind of struggling too. And they could be
And
like,
they
dude,
want someone to talk to.
yeah. And so they see somebody who maybe is struggling also and say, like, well, maybe this is someone that I can feel comfortable to share my stuff with, because they might have some stuff to get off their chest too, because nobody goes up to the guy who looks like he's doing fantastic and it's got, is super successful and says, like, hey man, it's like, something bothering you? Like, that's it's not usually how it goes.
Sure.
But
I think Bake the Snake says they want to be sympathetic for a second because it's expected. I think that's the other side of it. I think you're totally right. And um, that is kind of what ended up happening a little bit. But I think there is also that thing of, like, if you're looking someone in the eyes at work every day and you see that they're bummed out, like, you can only walk by them so many times without saying, like, are you doing okay?
But on the same token, as human beings, if you see somebody at work every day that seems bummed out, those are kind of people that you should
Connect with,
genuinely
and yeah.
actually kind of care about how they're doing, because of the fact that you spend so much time with them every day. I come from a background where you're supposed to treat your coworkers, right, as like your second family, because doing my job for so long, I spent more Christmases and Thanksgivings and New Year's with those guys than I did with my blood family. And so how can you not share? I think Hooknut said in the chat too, though, that sometimes depending on your occupation and stuff like that, you can't share, and I think that is true. There's a certain measure of stuff that prior to recent events, I couldn't share because it would have put me in a bad predicament with my employment. But that ship has come and gone, and so I can feel a little bit more comfortable in sharing because there's not much more that they can do to me at this point. So
Yeah, I mean, right, sure. There's that idea of, like, oh, if your managers or your boss or whatever finds out that you're dealing with depression, then you might face some sort of, you might not get a promotion, or you might not get a raise because they think you're not working hard enough, or because there's that stigma around it. So it is a struggle. I also want to talk about this.
yeah.
I mean, this is, I think, probably the most, like, directly symbolic thing in the book for me, where they have this mirror that shows kind of your inner self, or your true self. And it's supposed to be that, like, you know, this is an illusion, and this is what they've gone through all the torture and everything, and all the, you know, after all the torture from Granny, and this mirror is showing what they really look like. But you know, they talk about it being their true self, and you know, I think that is it is really symbolic of like this idea of your outer shell or your outer persona and your inner self, um, and like what you're really going through or what you're really feeling. Because you know, a lot of times when people say, "Hey, how you doing?" you just say, "Yeah, good, fine, well, whatever," um, because you have this shell. And sorry, I'm showing a butt on my YouTube channel, but um, I mean, clearly this is supposed to. I mean, I would assume clearly this is supposed to represent that. I don't think it's supposed to just be like a thing about their childhood on Apocalypse, right?
No.
TJ says, I don't want to talk about it with people anymore. I'm afraid of losing friendships if I'm always down, and usually just feels worse when I do. Yeah, I recently said to one of my really good friends, like, sorry, I'm not fun to be around lately, or like, sorry, I'm not, you know, fun to hang out with anymore. And she was, you know, of course, very kind, and said a lot of nice words about how, you know, she's my friend for who I am, and yada yada yada. Which I don't want to yada 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 her, because it was very nice. But yeah, you know, you get that fear of like, yeah, people will support you, but you know, you see it with Barda in the book where she supports him until she doesn't.
Yeah, I mean that's true, but I also think if you talk about developing friendships and quality friendships and people who are like truly your friend, the hope and belief is that they're going to be supportive of you
No
through
matter
your
what.
right, because the idea is that the struggle shouldn't last forever, right? Like there should be improvement, or you should get better, or you know, even when I'm having a bad day, I still try to like tell jokes and not be like a complete buzzkill all the time.
Sure.
You know, so I think you can't let that fear of like, you know, like letting people know you're hurting, because I'll tell you what, if someone's really your friend, you could tell as many jokes as you want, they're going to know that something's not right.
Right. And if someone's really your friend, you can talk about as much as you need to, and they're still going to be there for you too.
Absolutely.
But
um
I mean, to TJ's point, like there is always that fear, because you know there's that self-doubt that comes into everything, for me at least.
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, that's why we're, you know, that's why we're having this topic, this
Right.
conversation, because I think that's something that a lot of us do share. You know, insecurities and self doubt are not a mystery to most people.
Yeah, I think, you know, we talked about this last time where I made the joke about P. Diddy, but I think, you know, everyone is kind of not comfortable with themselves in one way or another, or, you know, have their own um, insecurities or self-doubts or whatever. And Kachung says you can't let down a true friend. Yeah, I think that's well put. And then Reggie confused me for a second. Welcome to the chat, Reggie. He said, I love what? And I thought he was asking someone something in the chat. But then he said, what you guys are doing with this series. I appreciate that, Reggie. So, yeah, I mean, and like I can keep bringing up examples like this one where he's in the shower and Barda's talking to him from outside the shower, and he just kind of like collapses and lays down because he's just like overwhelmed with everything. You know, I think this is the point at which it, like I was saying, it kind of circles back to it being about Scott and his struggles, even though he's about to face off against Darkseid. Like it's not really about that for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think that leads into, like you said, that really interesting conversation that he has with the guy at the supermarket checkout, and uh, and he has multiple conversations
Right here.
as well, like with Bardo, where she like breaks the poster, the Kirby poster
Yep.
of the Mister Miracle #1 in the living room, because Scott is thinking as if he as Highfather, and he's really evaluating like maybe I should give my kid away, which leads to probably in this second half of the book, I think my second favorite dialogue, and that's when Scott and Barda are at the park, and he's pushing
Yep.
Jacob in the swing, and Barda's kind of playing on her cell phone, if you will, and he's kind of trying to like justify why he would consider this,
Yeah,
and
and
he's saying,
rationalize it.
yeah, like, we were raised there, like we met each other, we made it out. And he's kind of like, and now like we're okay. And Barda is all of a sudden stops and is like, are we? Is that
Yeah.
why I had to find you bleeding out by the toilet? Because how well we're doing?
Yeah. He
And
says specifically, and we're happy,
I,
which is like he knows is a lie. Like, but it's that sort of thing where it's like you have this life and you're supposed to be happy with it, and
and it's all,
that
it's, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, sometimes it's not that simple.
And then, yeah, and then Scott's kind of going over like everything that was wrong, like that wasn't fair, I'm trying. And now you really see like this is where Barter really like kind of loses it, and she's not ignoring him or being supportive anymore. She's like being really blunt and like good for you, like you're trying. And like she's like, when do I get to escape? And that's like also one of the first times that I think we see her, because you talked about in that scene how like unemotional she was about this guy getting like his head smushed by Calabac, and you see her get like really emotional, and she's like basically saying like, you were trying to escape from me, like you're dying to get away from me, and I should run from you for that, and instead all I can do is take care of you. And she calls him like a selfish bastard, and she's just like loses it. And I kind of like, I think that I like that I think maybe without the apocalypse and the torture, I think that I've had that like exact conversation in
Yeah.
my life. um and especially after the things that I did, I think that that's so real to that event, that like when that other person finally stops like babying you and kind of like keeps it real and tells you like how fucking selfish it is, and how like how are they supposed to take something like that, like, because if you're saying that this is someone you're sharing your life with and then you're trying to get away from your life, then like how is that person supposed to feel? That's not really like a supporting or loving thing to do to somebody, if you you know what I mean, like if you want to be with them.
Yeah. And I mean, clearly, this isn't stuff that is just coming to Barta's mind in the moment. Like, this is stuff that she's been holding on to that she hasn't wanted to say or felt comfortable saying because Scott had tried to kill himself. And like, how do you say that to someone who just tried to kill themselves? You can't, because you know you don't know what to say to them. You don't know how to talk about yourself when someone has done something that is um, so serious. But she clearly has been holding on to this, and this is the moment where it all like comes out. And if you read it on a surface level, it seems like very cold and mean and heartless. But it just shows that she, like, how much stuff like this can affect other people, especially the people you're closest to. And but they can't always express it, I guess.
Yeah, and I also think it's also too the reality of it is that before, when she was kind of like ignoring him or even babying him or trying to help him, it was also just the two of them. And so I think in the same token that having a child kind of changed his dynamic, it also changes hers too. And that like Scott's not the most important person anymore. Like to her, this is about like her son. This is not about what Scott thinks is best for Scott or what Scott was like struggling with. Like it's not in her. it's not her priority anymore to make sure Scott feels okay. Her new priority is to take care of her child, which is also something that's very true of people who have kids. It shifts not only your dynamic in your relationship, but just in your personal life in terms of prioritizing, you know?
Yeah. And he
You're
says, we got through it. And she said, no, we didn't. We are it. And I think that kind of sums it up, right? Like it
absolutely,
kind of
absolutely.
becomes your life a little bit. But then they make up.
Right. Which also leads into another really, really great part of, I think, the book too, which is when they're prepping for Jacob's birthday and they've got all the Batman stuff and Funky Flashman, who, for those of you who don't know, I know we didn't talk about this, and maybe people don't know this from the original Mr. Miracle series. Funky Flashman was kind of like their like parody of Stan Lee.
Yeah.
He was supposed to be like Stan Lee. He was supposed to just be this like larger than life guy who was just like telling stories and kind of like being a jokester, and so when they brought him back into this book, they kind of did the same thing. He's got that kind of younger Stan Lee vibe, and he's telling stories, and I think he even drops a couple Excelsiors in there.
Yeah, and True Believers.
Yeah, and they also kind of like joke on Marvel because Jacob and Funky write this story together,
which is clearly Galactus.
Right. It's Galactus and the Silver Surfer, except it's replaced by a golden retriever and the Star Eater. But the gist of the end of the story is that Batman saves the day, and meanwhile the golden retriever found a boy named Jake Jones that gave him treats and loved him. Right. He finds a home and he finds love. And Scott's sort of like, dude, like what the hell are you talking about? Like that whole story, your story is nonsense. Like it's just your story. And Funky's like, no, I told you, it's not my story. It's Jacob's story. And isn't that something special?
Yeah.
Because he tells him like it's the meaning of life, that story. And it is in a sense this book, right? Because the meaning for him in this book is that he's like, where like love, where's your home, where's your love, where's your motivation to get through difficult things? And I think that's what he was trying to say, and I thought that was kind of powerful because, you know, on a personal level, I thought that was powerful. I thought that was an interesting take on
it definitely can be brushed off as something kind of silly because Funky is so silly, but I think you're totally right. It is very it kind of represents the whole theme of like what's important, and you know, yeah.
And then right after that, they decide, okay, we're gonna like kill we're gonna kill Darkseid. So
yeah,
I'm not giving my kid away.
And then they bone down.
Well, I think that happens in like 6 out of the 12 books in this miniseries.
So you sent me something that Comic Books NYC sent you, which was linked to a short video from, I think, Sci-Fi of Tom King talking about the book.
Yes,
and
correct.
The beginning and end, is like things that like feel kind of, I don't want to say out of place, but you know, tonally different. Is actually from the original Mr. Miracle series, so it's stuff that Kirby wrote,
which is really, really cool. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, like the last page and the first page where there's like the narrator who's like saying like, you know, it's true, they're in business, but what a business it turns out to be, and like all that stuff. Or like in chapter 3, I think they're talking about like the paranoid pill and Tom King says that's like literally taken from the beginnings and endings of like the original run of Mr. Miracle, issue 1, issue 2, issue 3, which yes is super, super cool little Easter egg.
And then we're back to another veggie tray, which I love. The return of the veggie tray, which this is like another amazingly hysterical moment in the middle of this very serious business of Darkseid eating a carrot, dipping it in the ranch. Like how absurd, so funny. And it's a whole page of him just crunching.
A carrot, yeah,
But
2 carrots.
it's still like kind of intimidating because it's, he's scary. And then these pages are awesome where they're sticking to this 9-panel grid, but Darkseid is just like too large to fit into any of them, so he's just goes across the whole page. I thought that was awesome the way they drew him like that.
I agree.
So they come in with this plan to kill Darkseid, and this is so gnarly. He rips his own eye out, so he can't use the anti-life equation anymore. Because they say like the equation is knowledge, so he can't get rid of it. But if
you can't use like the omega beams anymore, so
right.
That's like.
So what good is the knowledge? He basically says he has the bullets, but you have the gun. And then Barda crushes his eye. And then Scott says this very heartfelt goodbye to Jacob, which I don't know. I mean, you can give me your take on this. I have a take on why he does this, because clearly Scott knows the plan, which is to turn the stroller into this mega beam and try to kill Darkseid with it. But he still like says the goodbye as if he is giving him up. And we as readers know what the plan is. I mean, we don't know exactly what the plan is, but we know that they're trying to kill him. It's not like a twist. So I think it's interesting that he still says his goodbyes. Did you have any thoughts on that, or did you think about it, or?
I did, and I think that too. And to me, I thought it was more. I guess I kind of thought it related to like when he starts it and he tells him like, you won't remember what I'm saying. Like, I don't remember what my dad said. If I did, I think I'd hate whatever words he used. I think that was just more for himself.
Yeah.
Like he wanted to say those things that were like on his mind and maybe related to how he felt about being given up as a kid. So even though he knew he wasn't going to give him up, almost like those were the kind of things that like he wished he would have heard. You know, that whole
yes.
part about someone out there beyond the end of all of it, maybe someone loved me or maybe loves me. I think that's basically how he feels in this whole book, right? About life, about where his place in it.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, and obviously you don't have to believe me because you have to take me at my word, but that's exactly what I thought about it too.
We're like this, man.
Yeah. Two of a kind, somehow. So Barda says like this beam's unstoppable, it can destroy anything, but yet he still gets up from it. I love this part where she says bastard, and then it has this recurring Darkseid is thing, and he says, yes, I am. And
first time that he's talked.
Yeah, first time that he said anything. And I think that it's like, is he responding to this or is he responding to this?
It's a good question. I actually didn't think about that at all. Both, I suppose.
So then he beats them both up and is going to kill them. And then the veggie tray is important after all because it's hiding a knife that is made from Orion, which can kill a god. And so he stabs him in the eye hole where he pulls his eye out. And then it gets weird from there.
He also screams F you like 26 times.
Yeah, and they have this really funny conversation about like, oh, I thought you were going to say escape this. I thought we agreed on that. Like they had the whole plan down to like what catchphrase am I going to say?
Yeah, like what the one-liner was going to be when he killed Darkseid.
Yeah. He's like, well, it kind of got away from me, I guess. It felt right in the moment. And she's like, his first word is going to be the F word.
And then, like you said, of course, this is where it gets weird, and this is where most people, including myself, get very lost. And this is where you get that Inception moment of like, is the gonna stop spinning? Is it gonna fall over? Is someone gonna pick it up before I know the answer? Because
I've heard a lot of people say, I loved the series, but I didn't get the ending. And you know, they made the ending intentionally vague. And I think on my second read through, I kind of got it a little bit better, but so this
which the consigliere to Darkseid ends up being Metron,
right?
And he
I
ends
was looking for his name, Desaad.
And he ends up showing Scott basically like all the other DC superheroes, and kind of like, you know, this is one of those like continuity moments where it's like, oh, I get it. It's like
a Crisis on Infinite Earths type of thing.
Yeah, it's like a Flashpoint moment, and he's showing him like all this stuff, and
right, and he says there is another world, and I think that is the theme of the last issue and a half or so of what is this other world, right?
Right. Which, by the way, just to point out, the baby's first word kind of is fug. And then Scott eats some carrots.
So, yeah. Once again, the carrots.
Yeah. Veggie trays everywhere.
So, then Scott starts hallucinating again heavily. Although I love this, like, good morning, this like really first genuine smile you get from him in the whole book, which I thought was very interesting. And then he shaves his beard in front of the truth mirror, whatever it's called, and he's talking to somebody, and you find out that it's Granny, who's a hallucination. And then he later on talks to this drawing a blank on his name, Ambush Bug.
I don't remember.
Talking to him, and he's a hallucination. And then he's talking to Orion. He's a hallucination. And so you get this idea of these different worlds. And you know, on the one hand, it says, so you're just in hell like forever. You killed yourself, you died, you went to hell, you had to escape, and you actually found a way to escape. You decided not to. You should have gotten out. So he's basically telling him, no, dude, like, you're in hell. You did die. And then Orion tells him basically the same thing, that like, yeah, you died, but you're in heaven, because he says, I thought life was supposed to be about challenges, the struggle, the moment before the bow. If everything is easy and nice, like how now everything is easy and nice, you might as well be dead, which is a pretty grim way to think about things.
And those two conversations are exact like mirrors of themselves, right? Because the one you read, you killed yourself, you died, you went to hell, you had to escape, and you decided not to. And then Orion says the same thing, like, you killed yourself, went to paradise, tried to escape, found a way, decided to stay. It's everyone seeing his decision from different angles, but you know, in his mind, that is, right? Because he's seeing these things.
Yeah.
Which then leads him to seeing Darkseid and Highfather, which are also interesting moments.
Yeah, we have another Stanley moment where Funky says, with great power comes great possibility, and Jacob says, Exa. So yeah, and then here he is hallucinating Darkseid on the couch, which he doesn't really like interact with other than like use him as a footstool, which I think is kind of interesting. And then it shows Jacob kind of growing up, and he's the boy at the beginning who draws the face of God. And he's talking about what the fourth world is, and it says, "In the fourth world, my child, that is my world, the world I see when I close my eyes." And Jacob says, "And try to escape." And then he confronts his father in a Fight Club style parking lot brawl, punches him in the ear. I don't know if he really punches him in the ear, but you know what I mean. That's what it reminded me of.
Fight Clubbed him?
Yeah, he Fight Clubbed him. And then, he has this chat with Oberon, and
which is one of my favorite.
If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites because that's, Oberon was like his best friend, like his true best friend, and they did everything together. And so you see how hard it was in the beginning. He kind of, not only is Oberon one of the first people that you see him construct in his mind that he's talking to, but you also hear him acknowledge later on in that conversation with Barda when he's saying everything was wrong and the reason why he killed himself. And Oberon passing away was a huge thing that is so like real to a lot of people, because I think a lot of us have lost people that were close to us. And sometimes when you lose somebody who's very close to you, that can be that sort of catalyst for you to plummet. My mom died of cancer at like 55 years old, and she was healthy and she didn't drink and she didn't smoke, and she drove herself to like the emergency room because she had been having like really bad headaches for like a couple weeks, and she hadn't told anyone, not me, not my brothers. And when she got to the emergency room, she had like a full-blown seizure, and they had to intubate her, and they found out like she has stage 4 brain cancer, and like she's not going to survive it. And sure enough, like 4 months later, she was gone. And I think for me, that was like a time period that was definitely, that was like that the bottom of the barrel. Like it all came out from underneath me because I lost somebody that was really important to me, that meant a lot to me in my life. And so I think that when I saw that conversation and I see him talking to Oberon, that's kind of like what it brings into my head. And he's kind of crying to him and saying, I should have escaped. I shouldn't have escaped. I just, like, he's saying everything is wrong. And Oberon, this figment, is kind of telling him like, none of those other worlds matter. None of them are any more real than your wife or your kids. And he says, that last page said, kid, it'll break your heart. You can't escape that. But if you're good, if you stay good, you'll know there's someone out there who'll help you to put it back together.
Yeah. And, I think that's what we all kind of hope for. And I we have talked about this in private, that, my mom also died of brain cancer. And luckily I had a little bit more time with her between the time she got diagnosed and when she passed away. But it was a very similar sort of thing where she was at work one day, and she managed a little gift shop with a friend of hers, and she wasn't able to count change correctly. And so her friend kind of called my dad and said, I think we need to bring her to the hospital. And they found, a tumor, a fairly large tumor in her brain, and they were able to operate on it. And the difference it made was remarkable. And we thought that we had a fighting chance, and we did for a while, but then it came back, and the second time she couldn't beat it. So clearly we've talked about how I get where you're coming from there, because it's not easy to not have that person in your life anymore. who you knew you could always kind of trust and rely on, right? And even if it's in a hallucination, to be able to talk to them again would be, and get their advice is, yeah. So then we come to the last 2 pages of the book, which I think confuse people the most. Sorry, I didn't mean to just end that conversation. I just felt like it was getting a little.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to add anything else unless everyone wants to see me cry. So
Yeah,
we could move on to those last 2 pages. It would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Scott talks about how he has this really weird moment with Jake where he says, I looked at him and then he was looking past me at my dad, looking at his dad, and then I was looking at him and looking at his son and his son. And it says our look was just one look among a million looks, a million years, more than a million endless, but with an ending. So it's like he's either having an existential crisis or it's in reference to this infinite Earth theory of infinite possibilities, and Tom King even talks about the the 2 worlds that he's living in, and I think that is literal and figurative in this book because he's literally living in these 2 states of like whatever, the living and the dead, the hell, heaven and the hell, like whatever these, I guess I was under the assumption that he was dead the whole time, but I guess when you went to the talk, they kind of dismissed that theory. But he is definitely living between 2 realities. But it also speaks to the 2 states of his being, of the outer shell and the inner shell, the warrior and the fragile, broken, depressed human. So then on the very last page, it's like kind of back to this weird day to day where they're like, do you want to watch something? And Scott's like, oh, I forgot. Funky said that Jake put the remote in the dishwasher, and I guess it got washed. And Barta says, well, dark side is. And then Scott has the line, yeah, I know, but we are too. And then she has a really weird line where she says, Scott free, Mr. Miracle, what is wrong with you? And he says, I can always escape. And she says, can you? And she kisses him. And that's the line that throws me, the what is wrong with you? Because I think, this exchange of dark side is and him saying, but we are too, I think is a shift for him, right? Where he is now suddenly the optimist, where he has been the one, in the ditch, the emotional ditch the whole time. And then her response is, what's wrong with you? Which I don't know.
I guess I kind of took that more as like if someone were to be like, what's gotten into you, or like, like if you were at like, are you feeling okay?
Right, because she's
he,
so used to him being
like
like,
mopey and depressed all
are,
the
are you
time.
are you yeah? Do you have a fever? Are you feeling all right?
Yeah, I guess I kind of took it. I took it like that, as her kind of being more of just like surprised, like like are you feeling all right? Like,
Yeah.
you know.
Because we talked a lot about it in the last episode, this idea of the whole first half of the book where he keeps saying there's something wrong with me and everyone ignoring it, and then at the last line of the book is they're saying what's wrong with you. I'm sure that was not an accident.
No, I'm sure it wasn't.
So what do you make of the end now that our theory of the already dead is out the window?
You know, It is and isn't at the same time. I still kind of get that like inception sense from this that like you're supposed to, they didn't 100% dismiss that like whether he was dead or not at the talk. They just sort of implied that he wasn't, when they were talking about what they felt the themes of the book were from like fighting and battling and going from rock bottom and finding something to fight for and something to live for. And so if that's your concept of the book, then can he be dead, or would that like not really make sense? But then at the same time, like you brought up, Comic Books NYC sent me earlier a link to that little like 3.5 minute Sci-Fi Wire
Hmm.
interview with Tom King, and it was cool on a lot of levels because it's the most he talked more personally in that 3 minute video about the book than he did at the Barnes and Noble talk, and
Right.
he basically admitted that like this has a lot to do with him, and so clearly it was the closest he's come to saying yes, I've experienced these feelings.
Which is what we talked about last week, where we said, you can't write something like this without knowing it.
Right.
And we kind of jumped to that conclusion, and he, um, kind
He
of confirmed that.
corroborated it
Yeah.
in his video, and said that like that's something that a lot of people go through, that you think that there's just like, oh, everything's great and I have this one problem in my life, and if I fix it everything will be okay. And he was kind of implying that like there's not always one thing. Sometimes you struggle with so many things it can be difficult to kind of like figure out what you're like what to fix, or how you're supposed to fix it. But he also said in that video that they were purposefully vague about the ending because it's sort of something that you have to kind of determine for yourself.
Right. And he,
So
he compares it to, he says, like, oh, I've always wanted to ask the creator of The Sopranos, like, what his answer is when people say what happens after it fades to black, because like I always get this question and I need like a go-to answer, and I don't really have one, because he clearly doesn't want to give it away. He wants to leave it up to the reader.
right, and like I always bring it up, right? Because I've said it like 4 or 5 times, but Inception is the same thing. I know for a fact Christopher Nolan's probably been asked a million times, like, well, like,
Does the top fall over?
yeah, because that's all anyone wants to know when that movie ends. And so I think saying it's up to you, figure it out, it's more powerful because it's letting you kind of like determine what this book means to you, because you and I have talked about it from a sense too, that there are passages in this book that mean more to you than they mean to me, and there are passages in this book that I relate to more than you. So like,
Sure.
certain passages that relate to the struggles of like fatherhood, I can relate to more than you or certain other people that don't have kids. Those are things that are not necessarily universal. So it's it's unique to be able to say you can still have your take on this book without me telling you like you're wrong.
Right. And he also said that, like, you know, he knows and Mitch know, but Scott doesn't. So why should the reader? Which I thought
Which
was
is
an interesting way to think about it as well, because, um, yeah, if it's, basically from his perspective the whole time. I mean, it's not, because he's not narrating it, but like he's the one you're following, right? Like, why should we just be told what happens or what is happening when he doesn't really have an answer? But it also doesn't necessarily matter, because if he has found some sort of balance in his life and some sort of happiness, like, isn't that what's important in the end?
yeah.
Like the cashier says, how do you bring the most happiness to the most people?
Um, and I wanted to actually, since we're talking about Tom, I don't know because I have the Barnes and Noble version. In your version of the trade, does he have the introduction in the beginning that he wrote?
Um, no,
No,
just a paragraph.
it's no.
No,
Yeah, do you have this?
no.
I believe it's only in the Barnes and Noble version, and it's interesting because it is him talking about this, and so it's going to take me like 2 minutes to read this. But if you don't mind, I'd like to read the whole thing.
Yeah, go for
Um,
it.
so this is Tom King wrote this as an introduction to the Barnes and Noble trade, and this is what he says. Uh, April 2016. It was my wife's birthday, and we were at dinner with the kids, and everything was going well, so well, and I was dying. My chest exploded. The world started inching black. I reached for my oldest and hugged him close and said I was sorry that it had to be like this, that it had to be in front of him. I was so sorry. Later in the hospital, I told them I was either really sick or really crazy. I hoped I was crazy. You can come back from crazy. I prayed to God I was crazy. They did a lot of tests. Yeah, they said, you're crazy. Thank God, I said. And I went home and tried to figure out what the hell was going on. To get better, I did the things people do to get better, and everything was going well, so well, and the world went wrong. People everywhere were acting the way people everywhere shouldn't ever act. Rules that we assumed governed our behaviors were abandoned with ease and often pleasure. The astounding became casual, the casual became caustic. The world was either really sick or really crazy, and I hoped it was crazy. We can come back from crazy. I prayed to God it was crazy, and then I started writing Mr. Miracle. I'm not sure it's a writer's place to say what a book is. Mr. Miracle will be whatever it becomes when you read it, but maybe it's okay to say what I wanted it to be. Surrounded by the new nonsense of our everyday, recovering from the breakdown of my everything, I just hope to write a fairy tale that could talk not to the politics of the moment, better writers than I are doing that, but to the anxiety of it all. This floating, ubiquitous fear that so many are trying to escape and fight and escape again. I wanted to write about how we deal with this new pain, this new sense that there's something terrible out there, something vile that no matter what we do, just always, always exists, that always just is. In attempting to address this moment of insanity, I was fortunate to be partnered with one of the best artists in any medium, Mitch Gerads. At the beginning, I told Mitch I wanted to do this thing, but I thought it was impossible. No one could draw it. And Mitch said, let me try. 2,327 panels later, the impossible is done. It's here, and it's impossibly lovely. Looking at Mr. Miracle now, I don't think I've ever been prouder of anything I've written. Not because it's my best or anything like that, but just because whatever it is, at least my oldest can read this and know a bit of what it was like when the black was coming in and I saw his face and felt his arms around me, how tight he was holding me. That's in there, I think. Anyway, I see it there, and I think maybe he'll see it there, and he'll know as the world seemingly spirals on how much it meant to me.
Yeah, man. Why isn't that in the regular trade? That's powerful stuff. I'm surprised that they made that an exclusive.
Yeah, me too, because I think that it says that, exactly what we were talking about in terms of how he felt and what all of this kind of like meant to him.
Yeah. Um, and I mean, I don't think it was too far of a stretch for us to make that leap last week without actually knowing about it because, like we said, it's clear on the page that this is written from a perspective from someone who knows anxiety and knows depression and knows what it feels like to feel alone with it. So yeah. Um, so that's Mr. Miracle. It I think there aren't many comics that I've read, especially big two comics that are this affecting, at least to me personally. I think they really kind of shy away from tackling any, sort of serious topics. I mean, they've done stuff with racism and intolerance and stuff like that on a very symbolic level. But, I think this is very straightforwardly about these topics. And, you'll see this in a lot of indie titles, self-published stuff, even some Image stuff. But for DC um, to publish this and about a character that hasn't been around in a very long time, I think was a bold choice and a brave move. And says they won 2 Eisners for best writer and best artist, and well deserved because it is, I think, for me, it's a masterpiece of the time.
Agreed.
Um, so I don't really know what else to say about it.
Um, I mean, if we're ready to finish up, then I had just one last thing that I wanted to read.
Yeah,
Uh, so before last week's episode, and obviously before today's episode, after I saw those guys at Barnes and Noble, um, I just felt inclined that I wanted to say something to them, and that wasn't really the place to say it. And so, social media is this kind of cool place, right? Where people can be really, really terrible, but it also gives you more of an opportunity to at least try to reach out to people. And so I sent something to Mitch Gerads privately on Instagram. I wrote something, and I'm gonna try my best to kind of read it without like losing it a little bit. And so this is what I wrote. Uh, I'm quite positive people overshare with you guys on a regular basis, so I apologize in advance if you, in fact, read this for doing exactly that. A few years ago, I was involved in a serious incident in my job as a police officer. In the time immediately preceding that, my mom was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer at the age of 55, which would kill her less than 4 months later. And my wife suffered her 10th miscarriage in our attempt to start a family. And what I thought, excuse me, sorry. In what I thought was the lowest point of my life, I attempted to kill myself. And similarly to Scott, I failed miserably. This would inevitably lead me to being stripped of my gun at work and placed on desk duty pending my forced early retirement due to a diagnosis of depression and PTSD. By this point, we had had our miracle child, my daughter, but it wasn't enough to pull me from my hole. I lost my house, my wife left, and my daughter was living in another state. I had lost my, and I was faced with the immediate prospect of the loss of my job. I wandered into a comic store and saw the first two issues of a new series on Mr. Miracle. I loved Jack Kirby as a kid and had owned at one point all of his books. As you noted last night, it wasn't Kirby Miracle that you both created, but something entirely different. But it didn't make me uncomfortable. It actually made me feel okay for the first time in a long time. Because the first time in 35 years of life, I actually felt like someone represented me. So I'm still kicking and I'm still fighting. And I wanted you both to know that when I was truly at the absolute lowest point of my life, I found your book and perhaps it helped save me. I'm coping with my losses. I'm hopeful for the future and I'm fixing my relationships. The words thank you can't actually convey how grateful I am, but they will have to do. Thank you for making something so much more than a comic book. So I wrote that on Thursday, the 22nd. And on Saturday at about 2 in the afternoon, I got back a message from Mitch. And this is what it said. It said, man, I can't tell you how much your story means to us. Hearing that you saw something in this crazy thing we put together that propelled you forward is the biggest compliment we could ever receive. Thank you. Dark side is, but damn it, so are we.
yeah, man. Um, you shared that with me, and when you sent me that screenshot, I like it you know gave me a rush of a lot of emotion, because it's those two lines, dark side is, but so are we. It's like dark side is a comic character, but it you know it's more than that. And the idea of so are we, and this idea of us being and moving forward is powerful. And the fact that he took the time to read what you wrote and actually respond, I think, you know I'm sure it was completely genuine, his appreciation.
Absolutely.
um So thank you for sharing that. I know that it's personal, but I think was a appropriate way to end this. So um, thank you everyone for coming and joining the chat and listening to us. And you know, thank you to the community for being so supportive of each other, and it means a lot to me, and I know um, your friendship means a lot to me as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
And so yeah, I don't really know how to end it other than just saying
yeah, that's it. I mean, thank
everyone
you.
stay strong, and you know, dark side is, but so are we, right?
Yep.
Well, I love you all. Thank you very much. Bye.